Improvement Program, a public corporation chartered by the City of Seattle.
Welcome, everyone. Why don't we do a quick round of introductions, and then you guys can jump in on your presentation.
I'm Christina Van Valkenburg with SDOT, Transit and Mobility Division.
I'm Naomi Dorner with SDOT, and I'm the Transportation Equity Program Manager.
Alex Brennan with Capitol Hill Housing.
Great. Calvin, do you have anything you want to say before we jump in?
Yeah, just before the presentation, there is an ordinance that is attached to this. It is essentially approval of about $11,000 for grant. The reason why we have to take this to council is CHIP is a public development authority, so it triggers a requirement that we have to do this by ordinance.
Normally, we don't sign checks that small amount at the City Council, but this is a unique position, so we'll be happy to get to that after the presentation.
Okay, and before we start, I want to take the opportunity to introduce a person that we recently hired. Her name is Naomi Dorner. She's here on my left, and she's going to be developing the Transportation Equity Program within SDOT. So we're very excited to have her on board. So, and she actually has hit the ground running, and she'll be making a portion of the presentation today, together with our partners from Capitol Hill Housing.
Trial by fire. Welcome aboard.
Thank
Jump
you.
in.
All right, I'm going to jump in at the beginning of this presentation. I want to give you all a little background on the pilot program, how it came about, where we're at with the assessment of the pilot, and sort of the status of use and how it's going, and then look a little bit towards the future next steps and some of the testimonials that we've had from participants. As you know, transportation is the second highest household cost for low-income residents in Seattle. So it has a really big impact on affordability of living here in the city. When we reduce the cost of transit access, that means that we're freeing up resources for folks on fixed incomes to meet other expenditures that they need. It also means that people can have access to opportunities that they might not otherwise have. We've been finding that a lot of our residents, as you heard in public comment today, simply don't take a lot of trips, don't leave the neighborhood very much if they don't have assistance with access to transit. In 2016, the ORCA Joint Board approved this new multifamily ORCA Passport program. It had been in pilot phase a little bit before that. And so this is, we're taking advantage of a new tool that's being provided by our local transit agencies to provide transit access through the property management system that sort of comes with some of its own discounts. So the City of Seattle is really leveraging the discounts that are already sort of embedded in the way that these transit passes are structured. At Capitol Hill Housing, we became interested in developing a program like this based on a survey that we did in 2014, which was funded by King County Metro. The primary focus was looking at parking usage in the Pike Pine corridor, but we also surveyed residents about their transit use and how they were paying for transit, and found that in market rate buildings, and again, this is specifically in Pike Pine, the vast majority of folks in market rate buildings, 68%, were getting some kind of assistance from their employer or academic institution for a transit pass. Whereas residents of affordable housing who really needed that assistance more were much less likely to have that assistance. And so it seemed like there was a real gap in service, and that there was this sort of it's not, the passport program is not designed as a subsidy exactly. It's designed for other purposes, but it meant that affordable housing residents were paying a lot more for transit or not using transit. And so we started having conversations with Metro about the potential of using this new multifamily passport.
But Alex, the 21%, that's just in a couple of your properties in that neighborhood?
Yeah, so this was some of our properties and also some of Bellwether's properties on Capitol Hill.
And then you guys probably have, I don't know, 1,000 units under management? I don't know how big Capitol Housing is.
Almost 1,500 units now.
Okay.
And this is just a subset of those.
Do you have a sense if this is representative of, some of the affordable housing product in the city, or is you're not sure because we don't know have data on that?
Anecdotally, it does seem like this is the case in our other buildings.
Yeah.
We don't have the same kind of data, so it would require a more in-depth study to confirm that. But I think there's a difference in the types of jobs that people have. The people are not necessarily as likely to work regular 9-to-5 shifts that are more targeted by CTR programs, and so they're less likely to get a business passport.
Or maybe also not necessarily working for organizations that are big enough to qualify for CTR programs. When I talk to folks who don't have access to ORCA, they're oftentimes working in restaurants or retail where there may not be those kinds of benefits extended.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. And so in December of 2015, this is a little background about how the pilot came to be. In December of 2015, Capitol Hill Housing approached SDOT as well as King County Metro to pilot, with this proposal to pilot the TDM strategy. And they came to us with 3 housing properties at their location, and those 3 buildings are listed, but there were 122 units total that the low-income housing properties entailed. And so the pilot itself was a subsidized multi-family ORCA passport, and it was distributed to 122 units. The passport themselves made the transit services available to Puget Sound region, local and express bus service, as well as Link Light Rail, Sounder, commuter rail, and Seattle streetcar, as well as some of the passenger ferry services. I think the other item that I want to mention here is that we also tried, or we distributed car share membership as well as we had some transportation fares, so there was outreach and education on the properties as well. Additionally, or I guess a little more context, so the subsidy that SDOT provided was 50% of the passport passes for that full year. So for the 122 units, SDOT paid or subsidized 50% of the multifamily ORCA passports. And the residents or the units were paying the other 50%. So the outcomes intended for that first year were that again, the multifamily, the new product would be tested for the low-income properties, as well as we would see an overall reduction in the monthly cost for the transit pass that would be less, the price point would be less than the current ORCA products. And what we saw in terms of participation for that first year, we had the 3 buildings, so the Boylston, Howell, the Holiday, and Villa. Again, all of the units equaled 122, but I think the main point here, again, is that 50% of the costs were paid by upfront by SDOT, and then there was, so $32 for the Boylston, Howell, which meant that $16 a month were paid for those residents of that building. And likewise for all the other buildings. The costs were different for the 3 buildings for that first year, but the range was between $20 to $34.
Why the cost variation between the 3 different buildings? I assume they're all in the same shed.
I think I can try to answer that. The cost for the first year of the contract is based on census tract on a journal to work data. So those 3 buildings are in 3 different census tracts.
Oh, okay.
Therefore, for the first year, we have a differential, not for the second year, as we'll show.
Great.
Yes, and actually, that was the next point, was that we yes, so she already mentioned what the first year was based on. The second year, it basically, for the extension, there was a 75% increase in the trips taken on average, and so there was a 53% cost increase to renew the Orca passport. So that made the cost $40 a month. And so for the extended 3-month period, there was a $20 cost that was for the units, each of the residential units. And so I guess the main takeaway, or in terms of assessment, and we had 57% of the participants participated, and then we had, of those 57%, 44% did not have transit before. So we saw that this was a great support. And then I guess lastly, we just, in developing the transportation equity program and knowing that there is another product available to reduce the transportation costs for residents living in low-income housing, we'd like to consider expanding the program with Seattle Housing Authority and other low-income housing partners. So the last thing I'll say is in terms of where we're at now, we already talked a little bit about the ordinance, but in terms of the memorandum of agreement, there is an increase. So there was an increase of participants that participated in the pilot. We also are in the process of getting the survey responses. We're hoping for about 70% of the 122 households, so we have a better understanding. And then the final report, we'll be seeing that shortly.
Can I ask a quick question? Alex, do you mind going back a couple, 3 slides to the ones that have the 3 property costs? Yeah, there you go. So I want to dig in just a little bit more into your comment, Christina. The base for each of those months, $32 a month, does that presume Orca Lift qualifications?
No.
No. So,
No.
So that was just us baselining and subsidizing up to that $32 per month, right?
Exactly.
And then we asked the resident to pick up the tab for 50% of that base cost that we had already deeply subsidized.
Exactly.
And who picked up the other 50%? Us again?
Each one of the units, and we paid, SDOT contributed 50% of the cost of each pass, and the residential unit that purchased would pay for the other half.
Yeah.
For residential units that did not participate, SDOT picked up the cost as well.
But for the original prices, though, those are not subsidized. Those are the prices from Metro.
So $32 a month price from Metro is an unsubsidized rate based on income qualifications in the unit.
No, it's not based on income qualifications. So this is just the inherent pricing of the multifamily passport program. And this is why this is such a great opportunity, is that the prices that Metro provides to this program are much lower than an individual pass would be, even for a Lyft pass.
But this does have the same issue that the business passport program has, which is when you first start, you don't know how much people are actually going to use transit.
Exactly.
So they have to use a different stand-in to set that first price. So for these first prices, $32 a month, $34 a month, and $20 a month, those are based on travel share within that census tract.
And then the presumption is that once we actually have the data, we're going to get a closer to cost recovery.
Once there are actuals, then the next year they would set the cost based on what the actual cost was. In this case, it looks like that actually will increase by
to basically $40.
Yeah, it goes,
$40
yeah.
a month.
Now that you don't have a differential cost for the different buildings.
Right.
You just have a cost of $40 a month per pass, and the resident pay $20.
So if you go back again one more slide. So effectively what we started with was this, 32, 34, and $20 a month, with the residents splitting the difference between us. And now on renewal, all three of these properties would go up to $40 a month, and the assumption is that we would continue with the 50% subsidy, but ask the residents
That's
to go from either 16, 17, or $10 a month up some level.
Yes.
Regardless, incredible amount of work for us to make sure that we're really reducing the household costs. And to your point, Naomi, the fact that, a majority of these folks were not participating in any kind of transit pass program ahead of time, and that we had a 75% increase in trip usage is a huge a statement about not only giving people more mobility options to get to and from work, but more broadly, just opening up the region to them for all kinds of work, live, play kind of opportunities. This seems like a really great set of data points for us to really use to consider expansion.
And so I just want to, in the business passport program, there's a requirement that everyone get a pass. Or in a situation where it's 50-50 split, the employer doesn't actually have to hand it over to the employee if they're not paying their 50-50, but the employer is still buying the full pass. Is that the same here on the multifamily?
Yes.
So that's an additional subsidy, essentially. I mean, that's why the rates are $32, is because there's some people that aren't going to use them and they get averaged in.
Yeah.
And then how, with going up to $40, the folks participating all renewing, or some folks saying, well, for $10 I could do it, but for $20 I'm not going to do it?
So far, it doesn't appear that the price change has had a big impact on usage.
Okay.
In this new 3-month period, we've both been making an attempt to make another push to educate people in the buildings about the program, make sure that all the new people who've signed leases recently are aware that this is something that's available to them. So we've had some new signups in the last couple of months. We've also had a couple people drop out of the program, but what we've heard from them is more about a concern that it's not going to continue than about the price increase. Cool. So, if they have an opportunity now to sign up for another kind of pass and they're worried about this one going away, a couple people are making that switch early.
And so the, whatever the number was, 20-some% of the residents of these businesses or the buildings already have access through work to another pass. So they, I assume, would opt out.
Right.
The city is still required to buy the pass for them, even if they have another pass. But the fact that that pass never gets used at all means there's essentially zero cost in the next year, so it brings the average down. So there's maybe a little timing difference, but it works out at the end. We're not double paying, essentially. The math comes out. No. But I do have a question, though. I imagine most of the residents of your properties would qualify for Orca Lift. And I'm curious if we've done the analysis on if we were to just buy Orca Lift passes for folks at the 50% discount instead of this, what are the trade-offs and how does that look?
Yeah, so in these 3 buildings in particular, I think it's 68% of the residents or the households qualify for Orca Lift. So it's the majority, but there's a fair amount of folks who don't. Right. Most of those households are just above the threshold. So the average income in these buildings is $22,000. Which is right around the lift threshold. There were some people who were using the lift pass before. This is cheaper, so that's it's a cost savings for them. And then there are people who were paying $120 a month, or just not buying a transit pass because they couldn't pay $120 a month before. There's a mix of folks in the building. We've been suggesting to Metro and the other transit agencies that maybe there's some way to integrate these 2 programs to provide some kind of lift discount embedded in the multifamily passport program, or sort of otherwise discount it for affordable housing. And I think it seems like there's a reluctance to do that because of what the implications might be for the business passport program. Right now, we're despite the fact that most of the residents, or the majority of the residents qualify for a lift, we're paying the same rate that a market rate property would pay. But it's still a lot cheaper.
We're lowering the cost and giving people access to transit that otherwise either couldn't afford it or were spending a lot of money to do it. And so that's a huge benefit that we want to continue. I mean, I want everyone in our city to have whatever access they need to the transit system. So there's no doubt that's a good system. I do think when a business has employees who qualify for Orca Lyft because they're paying them so little to then get a discount on their Orca Pass, that doesn't seem right. When an affordable housing provider who's providing subsidized housing to employees because they don't make income, I think those are different programs. I get that this is a pilot and it's complex. We have to work with Metro, but it'd be interesting to continue to explore that. I don't think there's any reason to not figure out how we continue to make this more accessible to people, but that seems like there might be an opportunity to find that too.
I mean, I think one of the issues is trying to figure out how to get a pilot to scale so that there are more resources to be able to do some of those types of things.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, Alex, you're hearing from other residents of other buildings as this
As word
program,
spreads.
as word is spreading, that are saying, when is this coming to us? And conversely, those residents that have been part of the pilot program, as you mentioned earlier, having fear that it's not going to extend and going to other sort of Orca products as opposed to this, and increasing their household costs as a result doesn't seem like a good outcome for us either. So
Right.
how we figure out the scaling issues, but also how we figure out to continue the benefit to those who've been receiving it seem like two really important questions.
One other thing, I'll just run through these really quickly. We have a couple, I just wanted to highlight, we have some slides of some of the quotes we've been getting back in surveys so far, and I won't go into the details of these, but I'll just say when you do a survey, normally you have a little open-ended question at the end of the survey that says, if you have any other comments, feel free to share them with us. Usually you don't get a lot of feedback on that section of a survey. We've been getting sort of essay responses from residents on these surveys, and I think that really goes to how much this program is valued by them. So here are just a couple of different examples of how it makes people feel connected to sort of the city and transportation, the implications for them, for their household budgets, folks who have made, pretty serious decisions about their future transportation use, getting rid of their car because they see this as, a better strategy. And then just threw together sort of a mix of some of the shorter responses that we got back from folks, which, it's really heartwarming to see this kind of reaction and enthusiasm for a program like this.
So I just want to add that, as Naomi mentioned, I think a big takeaway is understanding that there's another product out there that can be used in addition to Orca Lyft to reduce the transportation cost for low-income, properties. I think, this pilot proved that that product can be used that way if we have some funding source, some underwriter that can pick up the 50% of the cost. As part of the transportation equity program, we're really interested, as Naomi mentioned, to have a bigger program. We really would like to extend this further, continue working in Capitol Hill housing and bringing in SAJ and some other properties. Of course, funding is a little bit of the limit, right? The barrier right now, but we'll continue working, looking for opportunities to see how we can, increase the program. Unfortunately for the pilot, our funding will end on June 30th, 2017.
Can you remind me, Christina, how much the program was underwritten by the city?
For the first year, I have to sum up all the costs, but was not to exceed $58,000. I don't think we spent that much. For the extension, based on the cost that we received from Metro for what would be the annual cost, the quarter cost is our contributions up to $11,000.
Okay, so that's for the next quarter, it would be $11,000.
Potentially.
And that $58,000 also includes $20,000 in that contract that went to a separate piece of work around shared parking. So it was actually a $38,000 sort of cap just for the transit pass piece of the initial contract.
You're probably right. Yeah, I have to add, but yeah.
And for your nearly 1,500 residents, remind me how many residents, this was 10%, give or take, 150 residents in those 3 buildings?
Yeah, a little less than 10%.
A little less than 10%.
Well, the map you showed on one of those slides of all the different affordable housing projects, I'm not sure if those are just Office of Housing funded or if that includes SHA.
I think this is just the Office of Housing's portfolio.
And so, 12,000 units of affordable housing in the city. The reality that some of those folks don't have access to, or a lot of those folks may not have access to affordable transit, even with the Orca lift, is something that I'm really interested in figuring out. And I hope SDOT can help us do some work to think about, okay, if we really wanted to take this program citywide, maybe with or without Seattle Housing Authority, how much money are we talking about? And at that scale, are there some efficiencies to be gained? Do we get Metro's attention to maybe come to the table with a little more robust product or something beyond just the pilot? But I do think that as a goal, it's something that we should be looking at.
I had a constituent just this week, and this is apropos of nothing, not knowing that this presentation was coming, send me an email saying, I own a small business. The city has a pretty robust commercial parking tax program and a pretty robust on-street parking tax program. I feel like that those, in some way, shape, or form, do impact the number of folks that are traveling to my business. But the city doesn't seem to have a tax on big box retail stores that have a big swath of huge parking in front of their store that we require them to effectively build, or we used to require it through the code. What are you doing about that? So I'm bringing that up apropos of nothing, that it was a really interesting email to get from a constituent today, or earlier this week.
Yeah. So next steps, we have an ordinance to pass here to approve the funding. Alex, what you said is, and what I hear is, the funding for the current program is going to end at the end of this month, and so people are switching off the program to find the next best alternative or losing it. The gentleman, in addition to the comments you have here, who came and testified, it was heartwarming to see how a modest investment can open up the city to him and his granddaughter, which is an awesome thing that we want to do. What do we do next to both keep the folks that have access to it going and figure out how we can expand to hundreds or thousands of more folks? Is the reality that on June 30th it's going to end?
I mean, right now that is the reality. I think we're continuing to try and figure out if there's a way to continue to find funding to continue the program. And then also thinking about directing people to other transit pass products. We've been having some conversations with King County Council about the program, and I think there's interest in figuring out a way for the multifamily passport to work better with affordable housing, but it may take a while to sort of get to that. I think we're also interested in the potential for additional city funding in the future. I mean, with the idea that we want this to be part of sort of a comprehensive approach to giving low-income people access to transit, right? And this is one of the tools. And so I know that there's some work being done right now to figure out, to sort of develop that framework and figure out how the different pieces fit together. And so the challenge is that when the funding ends June 30th, we probably won't have figured all of that out yet. And so there's going to be this gap, and we're not sure what to do.
Well, hopefully directing folks who are eligible to Orca Lift it's probably not a perfect transition, but it's something. Estet, I would love to work with you over the next 3 months as we think about our budget process this fall, to look at some opportunities to either expand the pilot more broadly with an idea to full implementation. for all folks in affordable housing. And so I know that's a big ask to financially to do, but I would love your thinking on what some next steps might be if we wanted to expand.
And presumably the action that we are about to take extends the program through the second quarter and into the third quarter, right?
No.
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 So this $11,000 is backfill for the March
Yes.
to June, so the program still
Yeah,
ends in
it's
June.
to allow us to pay the invoice from King County because there is an invoice for the first quarter for the first quarter, the extension of the memorandum of understanding, which is from March to June. So the action would allow us to, to extend the pilot for those 3 months and pay
Which
and transfer the funds.
Effectively, we've already done that, right? I mean, given the fact that
Yes,
you're,
that's
you're
right.
here nearly in the middle of June. Okay.
Yes, that's true.
The ordinance would ratify and confirm those actions.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right, I'll go ahead and move Council Bill 118992.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. So that will be done. And let's figure out how we can make the gap that's going to happen as small as possible and how we can give more folks opportunities. Alex, really want to thank your leadership on this in Capitol Hill Housing. Been thinking really creatively about how the transportation costs in the city overlap with housing costs. We've known for a long time that those are both significant costs to surviving in today's environment. It's getting harder every day. But I think some of the work that you've been doing gives us some hope that there are some things that we can do moving forward to help kind of ease the burden on some of the lowest income households in our city.
All right, thank you.
Great. All right.